Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Not So Dumb Blonde, the home of the Retired Good Girls Club. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Laura Cathcart Robbins, the best-selling author of Stash My Life in Hiding and the host of the podcast The Only One in the Room. Laura is a writer, speaker, and a storyteller whose work explores identity, belonging, addiction, and women's mental health with incredible honesty and depth. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Oprah Daily, Good Housekeeping, and HuffPost, and she's been featured on platforms like MSNBC, The Tamron Hall Show, and Dr. Phil. I am really grateful to have her here today for what I just know is going to be such a meaningful conversation. Today, we are going to talk about intersectionality and women's mental health. Hello, Laura. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Caitlin. Thank you for so much for having me again. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. Oh, me too. And for my listeners who tuned in to the Not So Dumb Blondes plural podcast a few years ago, we had Laura on here and had a wonderful conversation. But now I'm just so excited to bring her on here for just a totally different lens in women's mental health. And Laura, let's just go ahead and start out with why don't you just tell our listeners what you're doing right now and kind of how you got to where you are? Little elevator pitch.
A little elevator pitch. So, where I am, what I'm doing right now is I identify kind of first and primarily as an author. I was other things prior to the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, but now basically what I'm doing is writing full time. I wrote Stash My Life in Hiding, which was my debut memoir that was published in 2023. Paperback was published in 2024. Which was very exciting. And that was Atria Simon and Schuster. Incredible first book experience. Just like everything you see on TV happened to me with that book. And it was also very vulnerable and very intimate and very personal because it was like I write in that book about the worst year of my life, the most painful year of my life, I should say, maybe not the worst, but it was the most incredibly painful year of my life. And so the tour that went with that meant I had to talk about that year a lot. What I've been doing the last year and a half is writing fiction, which I was telling you is autobiographical fiction, which is called autofiction. And that is also based on my life, but it is fictionalized. So I can have a little bit more fun with it. I Want Your Life, which is the first novel I wrote, will be launched in 2027. It's going to be an Audible original. And I have two more kind of ready in the queue, ready to go. That'll go on in submission this year. So we'll see.
Wow. You're
Yeah.
just writing books left and right. I feel like you could do it in your sleep at this point.
I do write in my sleep, honestly. It's like, that middle of the night thing when you wake up and sometimes people think terrible thoughts. As soon as I wake up in the middle of the night, which isn't very often, which is good given that I was addicted to sleeping pills. That was so I get to sleep through the night, which is great. But when I do wake up, I just start writing the next scene of my book in my head. And that puts me to sleep in this very pleasant way. So I do write in my sleep as well.
I love that. Do you have a notebook next to your bed, like on your nightstand for when you have good ideas, or do you go on your phone?
No, I don't do either. I just do it in my head. Because if I open my
Wow.
eyes, it's over. I'm up. So I have this amazing retention for that, which I keep thinking, oh, I'm going to forget it. I'm never going to remember this. But I do. And then as soon as I get up, I do all this stuff. Like I meditate, I exercise, I drink a liter of water, I do admin work, and then I write. And so as soon as before the admin work, I will write down the ideas that I came up with the night before.
I love that. That's beautiful. Incredible. Not something I would ever be able to do. I always think I'll remember and I don't, but that's besides the point. And for everyone listening, I did listen to your book, Stash My Life in Hiding. I listened to it on Audible. And one thing I love is that it's your voice, which I think is amazing. I've heard that that can be difficult, but if anyone's interested in that book, it is Laura speaking. And so it definitely adds to that more personalized experience hearing about her story. But let's go ahead to ground us. Let's talk about intersectionality. The word intersectionality gets used a lot, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? So when
Yeah.
you hear that word, what does it mean to you based on your lived experiences?
Well, it's a word that was proposed to me for the flap jacket bio of Stash My Life in Hiding. So the flap jacket bio is like when you first open the book, and then there's the bio of the author on that, right inside the front cover. And it was a very hot word at the moment, very trendy. It was, I wrote the book in 2020 and 2021. So we were in the throes of the cultural reckoning that was happening all over the country. And intersectionality was coming up a lot, which meant at the time, to me anyway, that I was many things. I was a woman at that time. I was a Black woman at that time. I was someone who had been an addict and, who will always be an addict, but I'm also now someone in recovery. And so the places where all those things intersect would be the place that I wrote this book from.
Hmm.
So that's what it means to me in, like, the simplest of terms. It's
Yeah.
probably not a word I would have chosen for the flapjacket bio because I didn't use it a lot in everyday language or everyday conversation prior to that, but it seemed to really capture a time when it was important to acknowledge and embrace intersectionality, and it meant something different to people as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, particularly during that time, very impactful. And thinking about a story that you told on your TEDx talk about how you showed up at this writer's retreat. And for me, that really hit on the point of intersectionality a lot, the way you're describing it. Because you were like, on one hand, there's this part of me that's so excited to be here as a writer, but emotionally, it felt very isolating and felt like more of a solo experience. Does
Yeah.
that moment kinda connect to what you're describing here as well?
100%. Yeah, the writers' retreat was called Brave Magic. It was a 2018 retreat, which is like a million years ago now. But it was Cheryl Strayed and Elizabeth Gilbert. And they were two women that whose writing was so helpful to me when I was going through that most excruciating year of my life in 2008. I read both their books over and over again. And Gilbert has a book called Big Magic that I use as kind of my creative talisman as I go through whatever kind of creative endeavor I'm going through. So I was really excited to see these women. It was a 3-day retreat. I'd never done that before. I'd gone to 1-day retreats. And I'm not like good at sharing space. I don't room with people. I don't like communal eating. Like I'm not that girl at all. So I was a little like but I was like, "I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna see what it's like, and maybe I'll love it, or maybe I'll just tolerate it, but I'll get to have this experience for 3 days in the Santa Cruz Mountains." And, as soon as I arrived, I talk about the check-in line for the rooms was about 200 people long. And as I stood there looking at the line, other people started staring back at me. And that usually is, sometimes I'm in a room full of really short people. I'm tall. So sometimes they stare at me because I'm tall, right? Or sometimes it's because my hair is super curly and I'm with a bunch of like there might be a reason that people are staring at me. So I'll usually check to see what the difference is between me and the people that are staring at me so I can figure out why. And then I realized I was the only Black one there. And I was like, wow, this is a lot of people in the checkout line to be the only Black person. And, as the day went on, I checked every room I went to. I checked housekeeping. I checked the kitchen. I checked behind the front desk. Like, not only the attendees there weren't any Black people, but not even anybody that worked there was Black. Like, I literally didn't see another Black person for 3 days, and that had never happened in my life before. I had never had an experience where 3 solid days I was the only one. So, at first, that was just kinda like, "Uh-huh, okay, let's see how this goes." Still really excited. And, as the retreat went on, and as we were given exercises to do, as we were given breakout groups, the conversations that I was a part of, I started to feel excluded from. And then there was one writing exercise in particular that was just like, okay, I can no longer pretend I'm like everybody else here. I was trying to, just kind of suspend all any, prejudgment of what this might be like and just be a writer among writers. But I'm not just a writer among writers. I'm a Black writer here. And everything that's happening, not everything, but a lot of the things that were happening were telling me that. It was being reflected back to me.
Hmm. Yeah. And I remember you mentioning too the last time we spoke that, at some times these conversations felt more isolating when people were being overly accommodating, right? And so I can hear how isolating that, must have made you feel. And so much of your work really comes back to this idea of being the only one in the room. When
Yes.
did you first realize that that feeling wasn't just personal, but that it was systemic?
Oh gosh, I don't know when I first realized that, but I grew up I grew up in a black neighborhood, like a kind of a lower middle class black neighborhood in Cambridge, Mass. I went to an all white school. Not, you know, it wasn't supposed to be all white. It just was all white. And the black people that I knew often went to all white spaces. So it wasn't like discussed, but it was understood that when we went out into the world, we were probably going to be the only ones. And there would be this coming together, at the end of the day or the end of the week or at the end of the month or however long we saw, however often we saw each other just as a group of black people talking about like, girl, how are they over there? How are they over there? You wouldn't believe what they did to me here. And
Wow.
that sharing of our experiences of being the only one felt like, cool water after a sweltering day. Just that relief of being able to not just compare, but to have our experiences we reflect them back to each other. And I think that's something people of the dominant culture have all the time, so it's not as noticed or as needed. But when you're in the when you're in the margins, it is really necessary to be able to and it's and it could be, all male environment, and the women in that environment just need to get together and be like, "Can you believe this motherfucker?" He's talking
Absolutely.
about this like we're not there, right? Or like we didn't do all the work that got him there. And just having those moments, and it could be people of color as a group and not just black people. But it is special for me when it is black people and not just people of color. And I like to make that distinction because most of the people of color that I'm friends with, if they're not black, have had a different experience, especially here in America. The things they're afraid of are different. The ways that they gather are different. Sometimes the languages they speak are different. There is a commonality. We're all in the margins, but we're not in the same margin.
Exactly. No, thank you for explaining that. That's beautiful. And that takes me to my next question because you're really just describing what intersectionality really is, right? Is having some of those commonalities, but also still recognizing that, not all women are having the same experience. Not all people of color are having the same experience. So when we talk about intersectionality and women's mental health, it often stays pretty abstract, right? And so, from your perspective, how do different parts of identity intersect in ways that directly impact mental health?
Well, I will speak as a black woman for this. The community in which I grew up, which which also was a very hippie community. And I don't know if everybody knows what hippies are anymore, but they were very free thinkers. And they, were kind of like against society as a whole. And, there were like they wouldn't wear anyway. They dressed differently. They smoked a lot of weed. They wore patchouli.
Still kind of the same.
So my parents were kind of that culture. They weren't hippies per se, but they were also free thinkers. And, the way that wait, I'm sorry, I just totally lost track of the question.
Oh, you're good. Do you want me to repeat it? Or, well, first of all, you were on a great track. I was totally enthralled with what you were saying. So, what I was saying was that when we talk about intersectionality and women's mental health, it can be kind of abstract. So, from your perspective, how do different parts of identity,
Yeah. So so the black neighborhood that I was a part of and a lot of the black families that were my extended family, mental health issues were non-issues. There were no therapists, there were no psychiatrists. You did not do that. If you were of the black faith community, you worked out those things in church. Maybe you saw your pastor once a week for counseling, and that was okay. That was actually encouraged. But it's just so you could get back to being okay. This was not supposed to be a long-term thing. No one's supposed to go see a therapist for the rest of their life, right? And so the idea of talking to someone outside of the family, outside of the community is very taboo. And not only that, but things that are real mental health issues, such as depression, such as, crippling anxiety, learning differences, like which is not necessarily a mental health issue, but it can be part of mental health issues because it creates those two things that I just mentioned, depression and anxiety. They can, depending on how they're addressed. And so those things are not acknowledged, or they don't exist. Oh, you're a little low. You need to do this, this, and this. You don't go
Mm,
talk to somebody. Or you're nervous about this. You'll get over that. You don't need to talk to anybody. And there's a great fear that is based in the days of slavery, where, talking to anyone outside of one's immediate community, meaning the enslaved community, but maybe particularly your own family within that enslaved community, could mean death, right? You talk about your problems out there, you could stir the pot and we could be in danger. And it's very real danger. You know, the way that Black enslaved parents discipline their children was quite harsh, so that it would spare them the discipline of the plantation owners, managers, overseers. So there was this way that we had to handle things internally,
mm,
had to, or else it endangered everyone. And that's not left us yet. This the importance, the intentionality of handling things internally comes from there. It's not acknowledged, but the dangers feel as real as they did then to people who are afraid to reveal or to talk outside, even if they're talking to a Black therapist. We
mm.
just don't take it out of the family. It doesn't even be, it's not even a black and white thing at that point.
Wow.
So knowing that, and again, my parents were hippies, so they were a bit different thinkers, but what I observed growing up was this code of silence.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I can hear, I mean, it just sounds very, very complex and very nuanced. And that kind of leads me to my next question. I was going to save it to the end, but it's just too perfect of timing to bring this up and elaborate on what you've mentioned. So you just kind of spoke a lot on the complexity of needing support, but also not always feeling safe for help, which I think is a very common issue that people are experiencing right now, right? And especially in the spaces that are dominated by white people and white women, which, for example, my industry, my field of social work. So,
Yeah.
how do women of color navigate that paradox of needing care while also protecting themselves? And what do you think white women in mental health spaces often misunderstand about that hesitation?
Yeah, I think that the help you're talking about falls under the umbrella of medical, like that's all medical for people in the traditional Black community, and certainly there are outliers. My mom is 82 and she has medical anxiety because of the way that she was treated growing up. Whenever she saw a doctor, whenever she saw a nurse, she protected me from that treatment once I was born and going to different professionals, but she had a very bad experience with it. And I think that, if you look at the mortality rate, the maternal Black mortality rate, Black women die, while during childbirth. And I don't know what the rate is, but it is a rate extraordinarily higher than our peers, right? This is not, and it actually said the more educated the Black woman in those positions, the more likely she is to die,
Wow.
because there is this disconnect. People are not used to educated, intelligent Black women asking questions, and they get defensive. The
Wow.
caregivers in those positions get defensive and want to ignore what the Black woman is telling them about what she's feeling in her body, what she's feeling mentally.
Mm.
And I think I had a little bit of that after I gave birth to both my babies, and I was experiencing what I think now, because I was not diagnosed at the time, but was undiagnosed postpartum anxiety. And I think it was missed. One, because I was a woman. My doctor was like, I like my doctor. He's still my doctor. But I think that there was this idea that I was being an alarmist at the time. You're fine, everything's fine, you're healthy, blah, blah, blah. This will pass, this will go away. And, I was given the questions to diagnose postpartum depression, which I didn't have. I wasn't depressed. But because I was told definitively that I did not have that, they didn't do any more exploration. Would that have been the case if I had been white? I don't know. I
Mm.
don't know. But the system in general allows white women to move more freely within it. Black women are pretty restricted as far as what we can do, what questions we can ask. And then you leave. So, I mean, like, I didn't finish ninth grade. I don't have an education, but I've educated myself in other ways. So
Mm.
my dad's a doctor. So I learned a lot about medicine from him. But if you add a lack of education, um, and and the insecurity that someone might feel in a medical situation to being Black, you're probably it's a recipe for not getting the treatment that's due for you, that's best for you.
That's a really good explanation because I feel like as women, oftentimes we can all relate on a certain level of not getting the medicalized treatment or I guess, validation, right? But then when you add that extra layer to it and knowing that, a white woman going in to get treatment doesn't necessarily have to think about all of those things. Like you said, just gets to move a little bit more freely. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And one thing that I think you've done quite beautifully is opening up this conversation to help people feel more comfortable talking about intersectionality and mental health because it's really important to be able to talk about, but I think that there's a lot of fear around having these conversations, obviously, because so much has happened. So, I guess one of the questions that I would have as well is what have you seen that actually helps these conversations feel safer and more meaningful? And do you have any recommendations for people who want to start having these conversations?
Yeah. Nothing will change if the conversations aren't had, and they can't just be had among the people that are impacted. So they must be had with the people in the margins and the dominant culture. The dominant culture with people of the dominant culture, and really this really just falls on white women, honestly, because white men aren't going to be our champion.
Mm.
There are a few. God bless them. They, they
Right.
are a few that rise above and start these conversations and hold spaces where these conversations can be held. But for the most part, these conversations will have to be instigated by white women. And yes, there is a fear. I am on cringe alert when someone starts talking to me about race because God help them if they say the wrong thing, man. I'm like, please don't say some stupid shit right now. Please. I really like you. I want to continue this conversation. Don't tell me that Black people don't have access because they don't have money, because then we're a monolith and it's not about money. It's not about education. Black people have education. Black people have money.
I can feel it.
So how do we start these conversations risking the cringe? Because the cringe moment's gonna happen while we have these conversations, and, that expression, like, "The first one through the wall gets a little bloody."
Mm.
Someone's gonna have to get bloody. A lot of people are gonna have to get bloody. They're gonna have to be the one to stand up and say, "Look, I don't wanna say the wrong thing, but I see that this is a matter that needs attention, and I'd like to help.
Mm.
Tell me what I can do. How can I help diversify this room we're in? How can I help make sure that, there are more people of color in the hospital, in our local hospital, as not just physicians or nurses, but admin, administrative positions to be filled with Black people, filled by Black people who understand and are compassionate. Because you can be compassionate, but if you don't have the experience, the lived
Mm,
experience, you can't know what to look out for. And you can't really know when shade is being thrown. It's just a different kind of shade. And by that I mean microaggressions.
mm,
When someone is being set aside because of X, Y, or Z, if you have that experience of being set aside yourself because you're Black, right? Or, let's broaden it now. It doesn't have to just be Black because we are talking about, starting conversations where everyone can be included. So, where I am, I sit on the board of a school and I'm on the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. It took me a second to get that out. It
little
used to
fumble
be
over the words.
DEIJ
Yeah,
and justice, and I was like, wait, and one of the letters is missing.
it's
um,
changed.
Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So I'm listening to the reports. Oh, like, we, raised the price of a hamburger by 50 cents in the lunch line. Okay, the school needs it. Prices went up. But how do I protect my students who are on the socioeconomic spectrum at the school who can't afford that 50-cent raise?
Mm,
Do they then have to get, something that identifies them as being someone who is on aid, while they get their lunch? We don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want them to look any different than their peers when they get their lunch. So
mm,
how do we make that so? We we acknowledge the raise. We need to make sure our kids are covered, right? So they still pay for their lunch exactly the same way, at least visibly, that their peers do. And, then we're looking at curriculum in this school. I got a lot of literature and plays added by Black playwrights, added by Black authors. Classics. Put them in the canon at the school. I'm very pleased with that. But what about our Latino students? Are they being represented fairly? So now we have to go back and we have to look at the curriculum through that eye and make sure that we are representing everybody, the LGBTQ plus community, our Muslim brothers and sisters. Like, can everybody see themselves in every aspect of every classroom, even if they're just the only one in there, right? But do you see yourself reflected back? And I have no problem being that advocate. I like being that advocate, but I can't be the only one. And like I said, I can't have those conversations on my own behalf. Someone else has to have those conversations. Women of the dominant culture have to step in and have those conversations, assess what's missing and then advocate for those voices.
mm. It sounds like a lot of what you're saying too is just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and
Yeah.
knowing that, right? And knowing that we're going to make mistakes in these conversations. We're going to upset people. We're going to fumble. It's
Yeah.
just a part of the process, but acknowledging that that will happen, acknowledging that mistakes are going to be made in the conversation, assumptions that are incorrect are going to be made, and getting curious and allowing each other to have that conversation in a safe space and being like, hey, when you said this, this is kind of actually what this means. And being able to do that respectfully, I think is so important. And one of the things that it's so funny, this is interesting. I don't know if you've heard about this, but I did an intercultural development inventory assessment for school, and it really challenged me. And it showed that I oftentimes try to relate to people and different cultures by sameness to feel more connected, because that is, that's a way of people relating. There's no bad intentions there, but the more honest work and what I'm is acknowledging that there actually is a difference, and letting that be there, right? What do you think about acknowledging difference? Why do you think that acknowledging differences can sometimes feel so threatening for so many people, even when the intention is to be inclusive?
Yeah. Yeah. And someone told me once, like, never discount the other person's attempt to connect
Mm,
because I want to throw they said something stupid and I want to throw them out with it. And then, the idea is like, no, they were just trying to connect. Right. And I think what you said is really important. I did what wanna say. I might forget what you said in a second, so I'll ask you to remind me again.
Go for it.
And this is gonna be controversial, what I'm gonna say, but I think that there was also a year or 2 where DEI practitioners were kinda smacking the hands of people who did say the wrong thing, and there was, like, an overcorrection. "You're not allowed to. How dare you? You should know better." And I think that made people more shy to come forward because no one wants to be shamed. And I think that what's happened is a lot of those DEI practitioners are either doing it differently or they're doing different things. And the ones that I've seen and have come into contact with are not those people, the hand slappers, the shamers. But, I think that was a backlash, right? We didn't get to shame or correct anybody for so long. It's like in 2020, we get to correct people, so we kinda went crazy. And now it's like, "No, no, no, that's not cool. That's gonna, make it go the other way." So, I just wanted to just say that because I think that a lot of people felt that, but were afraid to say anything because it wasn't politically correct to criticize this very fresh, fragile power that it come to be, this power dynamic that it shifted. So, now I did forget.
You for adding that point, though. I'm glad you did because I do think it's really important going back to the importance of having these conversations and
Yeah.
allowing people to make those mistakes because humans are based off of reward, right? And so if we have conversations and although we can't control the outcome, but if every time it turns into, something revolving shame, people might be, they might be more hesitant to speak up.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really good point that you brought there. And let's see, what was the one that I asked? Yeah, why do you
Leadership.
think so the question I had asked was, why do you think that acknowledging differences feels so threatening for so many people,
Yeah.
even though the intention is to be inclusive?
Well, I've had this experience myself where particularly, like, with the LGBTQ community, Q plus community, um, I feel like I feel the same feelings as them because I've been excluded, I've been, looked down upon, I've been shamed, I've been thought less of, people have, prejudged me. And so my attempt to connect with there's one person in particular whose name I won't say, but I wanted to tell him how I felt about something first so that he could see that I felt the same way about as he did about the same thing. And so in my attempt to be like, yo, brother, look, we're the same. I had this too. I went blah, 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 blah. And then I also find that, when we're talking about socioeconomic issues, I have this affinity, I grew up really poor, like welfare poor, and I want to connect to people who are currently experiencing poverty and scarcity in a way that's not appropriate because I was once, and that's not a connection, right? So I've I've started sentences now, and I really check my urge to tell the story that is gonna help me to connect with them too, because sometimes there's another motive there. Like, sometimes I want to show them, yeah, that I'm down, but so that I feel better about the moment, not to really connect with them. Like,
Mm,
I will feel better if they see me in a certain way, right? And
mm,
it's not really to be helpful in that situation. So I try to check my motive before I tell the story. And then I will say, I want to acknowledge my privilege here. This is I acknowledge, and I talk about that a lot with writing too, because I teach writing. And as you and I were talking about, I write pretty much all day. I write from like 11 to 7 every day, 5 days a week. And so when I talk to people who are just starting out, I want to acknowledge my privilege. Not everybody can afford to do that. One, if I had little kids, I could not do that, right? The time would just not add up. Um, I don't have interruptions in my life. So I want to acknowledge my privilege before I talk about my writing schedule. The same way I want to acknowledge my privilege before I talk about, the vacation I couldn't take to someone who might be dealing with scarcity or poverty. But I want to connect with them. And so I'm telling a story that may not be the right story to connect with them at that moment, but my intentions are good. And, in DEI work, we always talk about intentions versus impact, right? My
very
intent
important.
is, yes, what is the impact of my intention on this person? So to your point, when people that are not Black are coming to me
Uh,
to connect with me about something. This happens a lot in recovery meetings. I'll have shared about something, either a feeling or a circumstance that I've had either in my addiction or in my recovery. And a really good example is, I don't know if this is a really good example, but I'll give you this example. Um, I will share something about, oh yeah, one of my kids was pulled over by the police, which is a really scary thing, a really scary thing. He was fine. It was this ridiculous thing that happened. He was speeding, and the guy saw that he was in basketball uniform, and he thought that he was like a scholarship kid, so he let him go. But I was sharing about the feelings of that, and someone else shared back to me, like, yeah, I used to be really worried about getting pulled over when I was drinking, but now I'm not worried anymore because I'm sober and, they can't take me in for DUI. And I was like, yeah, that's good for you because you're white. You don't ever have to worry
exactly.
about getting pulled over if you're sober. But every Black person and now every Latino person, every person maybe that's not of the dominant culture has to worry about that all the
Mm,
time. So their effort to connect with me about my son's experience fell flat because it's not apples to apples at all. However, if he had said, "I want to acknowledge my privilege here," or "I wanna, check my privilege before I tell you this story," then I would have heard it differently.
mm,
So maybe that's the key, is just to really, 1, check your motivation for the connection that you want to make, and then 2, if the motivation is pure and you wanna tell the story, it is going to help to connect, just to, you know, assess it for any privilege that you might need to acknowledge first, so that it
hun-
is a true connection and not something that is going to offend or, put off the intended connector, you know?
that's beautiful. I mean, just knowing that the person that's speaking to you has the awareness
Yes.
helps it land a lot better. And acknowledging privilege is a wonderful way to do that. I think that that's wonderful. And I think that that's a great way for anyone who's looking to have these types of conversations and maybe doesn't know where to start, starting with acknowledging privilege and just really getting comfortable with understanding that part of ourselves, right? In mental health spaces, we often talk a lot about neutrality or being objective, but neutrality does not always feel safe. And especially for people whose identities are marginalized, how can neutrality become harmful?
Can you just give me a little bit more about neutrality, like how
Yeah,
you're using it?
like for
Like,
example, yeah. Like not speaking up for
oh, yes,
when someone
yes.
is noticing, right? And just kind of not saying anything is kind of harmful because it's reinforcing certain systemic bias, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's, to see something, say something, and, man, that is hard to do because, 1, we live in a very trigger happy society, and sometimes you put yourself in real danger by calling attention to something that might make someone uncomfortable, physical danger. And then there's the emotional danger that you could be putting yourself in because you might get embarrassed, you might get shut down, it might be in public. But I'm trying to think of it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said something about the bystanders, that it was like as much the onus was as much on them as it was on the perpetrators. And I'm
Mm.
butchering it, but it was something like that. And I thought about that after I read it. I'm thinking, is that right? Like, because there are times where I'm like, I'm out. This is getting too
I'm
crazy.
gonna step away.
I am definitely stepping away. But I think when something is systemic, when it is happening over and over and over again, when it is clearly egregious, when it is on your heart, or where it hurts your heart to see this thing happening over and over again, then it is up to, again, people of the dominant culture, but anybody, to say something, to not remain neutral. And on a very smaller scale, you know, one of the things, I didn't know this, that it wasn't okay to say that someone's your spirit animal. This is
I just learned that. That's so funny. I said I full disclosure, I made that mistake and someone corrected me on that, and I was like, "Okay, I'm learning
Yeah.
something."
I learned it a couple years ago. I actually didn't say it, but I nodded vigorously when the person did because I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And they were corrected, and they were corrected by someone who was not indigenous, not Native American. They were corrected by a white woman who said, "Listen," with a hand on their shoulder, very, very quiet. "I have just recently learned that that's not something that is appropriate to say anymore." And I was like, "That is classy as hell." Like, they just, like, gave them a lesson. They didn't call them out loudly in front of everybody. It was a very small circle of people, and it really inspired me to do the same as things come up. I had an opportunity when someone said, "Excuse my French." I'm like, "Yo, that's okay."
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
putting down French people. It's because the idea was that the French and their language was vulgar and as what's the word I'm looking for? Not sophisticated, but whatever. That it wasn't as acceptable as other languages. So when you say excuse my French, you're still putting down French people. So I had the opportunity to pull her aside and just say, "Hey, I just noticed that you say that. What people are saying now I understand is excuse my language instead of
Mm.
excuse my French." And she was like, "Oh, I never thought about that." Like,
Oh, and so she handled it well, that's
yeah, she
good.
did, she did. I think if I'd done it in front of people, it might have been different, but I really did wait until I had a moment, and I was like, "If I don't get a moment with her, I'm not gonna tell her, it's not that big of a deal, but if I have the moment, I'm gonna tell her," and I had the moment, so I told her, and I really summoned as much compassion and kindness in my voice and told her that I had made a similar mistake, and that's how I learned. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
yeah.
What I love about that is it sounds like it was a learning experience for both of you, and
Mhm.
when we do step up and do stuff like that, we are inspiring others to do the same. So I think that a really wonderful point. The last question I want to ask you, which I think is one of the most important, this entire podcast is about helping women feel more comfortable stepping into their true authentic selves, speaking up for what they need, setting boundaries, and not feeling that need to continue to feel small like so many of us do, right? What advice would you give to women of color or Black women who are maybe feeling like they need mental health support, but feeling some of those struggles that you mentioned earlier, maybe not feeling comfortable, maybe not feeling like they would be supported?
Yeah, I certainly felt like that when I went to treatment for my addiction. I was very wary of how I would be treated there, how I would be seen if I would indeed get the help that was available to everybody else. And, I think ideally before we're in crisis, we start the research, right? We start talking to people. We start, finding out, yeah, we don't talk a lot in our community about going to therapy, but sisters are going to therapy. So start asking people one by one, have you seen a therapist? Did you have success with that? Would you recommend that person? And start kind of amassing some information about it, even if it is just individual to individual. And then, ideally you start a group conversation about it at something, a gathering or a salon where people talk about mental health issues in the Black community.
Mm.
It's so important. And actually, honestly, there's so much on TikTok and Instagram now. Instagram. That was very
Instagram.
it was like somebody pushed on my back, just Instagram, where you can find communities and hear people talking about it. Maybe they're not your friends, but you can hear these conversations that are being had. If you just look up hashtag Black women mental health, you'll see groups of people that are talking about these issues. But I would really recommend that you start talking to your friends now because what I found was that the majority of my Black female friends are in therapy. And I thought it was reverse. I thought the majority of them weren't because nobody had ever talked about it.
Mm. Yeah, and feeling empowered as well to ask clinicians questions to make sure that you are finding a therapist that you feel comfortable with that's not going to reinforce any of these negative
Yeah.
systemic harmful beliefs that even unknowingly, right? Because it's still important, to get the support that you deserve. So it's okay to ask clinicians questions. It's okay to ask them about their political beliefs. It's okay to ask them about their background and their experiences. So it's should always be a safe space to do that. Is there anything before we wrap up that you feel like you didn't get to say that you would like to say?
I'm still like back on it's okay to ask clinicians about their political beliefs. Really? That's
Yeah,
brand new information to me.
absolutely.
So when someone's coming to you, when you're working with somebody, have you had anybody ask you that?
So I have not, but what's interesting is one, because it is kind of a very nuanced thing,
Yeah.
but clinicians don't have to answer.
Right, right.
The person who's receiving the care has a right to know the care that they're going to be receiving. And if they're going to be paying someone,
Yeah.
ask the questions that you want to ask. And, it's really up to the person who's wanting to receive the care. Do you want to see a clinician that's not comfortable with sharing those beliefs? That is completely up to them. But hell yeah, ask. Why not?
That's great advice. Yeah, I think it's essential. It's not only okay, but it is essential to ask anyone who is caring for you questions. And that's another thing that one can gather with doing those surveys or polls of the people in your community. What do I ask? What did you ask? What do you wish you had asked when you went in? And
Mm.
assemble a list of those questions. Yeah, I mean, this has been such a great conversation.
Oh,
I
good.
really
I'm so happy.
enjoyed it. Yes.
Me too. It's been wonderful because I feel like we talk about really deep things, but we're also able to do it in a way that feels not lighthearted at times and be able to really just acknowledge the humanness of this whole experience of what's going on. And I've really enjoyed this as well. And like I said, when I first started talking to you, I feel very honored that you came on the podcast. It really means a lot to me. I think the listeners are really gonna love this. Where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, I try to streamline everything. So my name is Laura Cathcart Robbins, which no one will remember as soon as this is over, but Cathcart is Cathcart. Robbins is Robbins. That is me, Laura Cathcart Robbins on Instagram. My website, which houses everything, including all my socials, is also lauracathcartrobbins.com.
Wonderful, and be sure to check out her book, Stash My Life in Hiding. It was a great book, I loved it, and
Thank
then
you.
also stay tuned for your future books that are coming out, and yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for having me again.
Of course.